Here's John Lennox to insist that a God exists.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I believe in God. I believe in the supernatural God who created the heavens and the earth. I believe in a God who holds the heavens and the earth in existence.
Why would anything need to hold the heavens and the earth in existence? What reason do we have to believe that these things would just disintegrate without some supernatural force holding things together? This kind of thinking implies an assumption that is common among apologists, that the default state of reality is chaos, and the only way any order exists or persists is because it has to be imposed by a god. This is a baseless assumption.
I believe that on the basis of rational evidence.
It's weird to describe evidence as rational. How could evidence be rational or irrational? I think what he meant to say is that he drew a rational inference from the evidence. He didn't, though.
Similar to the beliefs held by the founders of this house, who gave this university the motto, Dominus Illuminatio Mea. They saw no contradiction between faith in God and the utmost excellence in rational inquiry.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that people didn't see 200 years ago. They also didn't see any contradiction between the idea of spontaneous generation and the utmost excellence in rational inquiry.
And if I dare mention my alma mater of Cambridge in this holy place, I would remind you that on the door of the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge are written the words, "Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them." And as we look at the rise of science in the 16th and 17th centuries, Alfred North Whitehead and many others commented that men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver.
I guess that's why atheists never become scientists. They don't believe in a lawgiver, so they don't expect nature to have any laws. The idea that laws require a lawgiver is also inferred from the baseless assumption that the default state of reality is chaos, and order can only exist if it is consciously imposed. This is also a misunderstanding of what a scientific law is. As Bertrand Russell pointed out, it's silly to think that a law of physics needs a lawgiver because laws of physics are not behests. As he says in Why I Am Not a Christian, human laws are behests commanding you to behave a certain way, in which way you may choose to behave, or you may choose not to behave, but natural laws are a description of how things do in fact behave, and being a mere description of what they in fact do. Laws like that do not, in fact, require a lawgiver.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not ashamed of being both a scientist and a Christian, because arguably Christianity gave me my subject.
I'm very skeptical of the idea that Christianity gave you the subject of science. But even if it did, so what? Arguably, alchemy gave us chemistry. Is that a good reason to believe that the two are compatible?
What I am amazed at is that serious thinkers today continue to ask us to choose between God and science. That's like asking people to choose between Henry Ford and engineering as an explanation of the motor car.
No, it's like asking people to choose between alchemy and chemistry, or numerology and mathematics, or astrology and astronomy. Many sciences that have shown themselves to be useful and effective have grown out of epistemic paradigms that are far less useful and effective.
When Newton discovered his law of gravity, he didn't say, "I've got a law, I don't need God." No, he wrote the Principia Mathematica, arguably the greatest work in the whole history of science. Because he saw that God is not the same kind of explanation as a scientific explanation. God doesn't compete. Agency does not compete with mechanism and law.
I agree it doesn't compete because it can't compete in any scientific sense. Mechanism and law are observable. Supernatural agency is not.
Why is there something rather than nothing? Alan Sandage, the brilliant cosmologist who became a Christian in his 50s, said God is the answer to that question.
That question assumes that the default state of reality is nothingness and existence must be consciously imposed. If you ask apologists why there is a God instead of no God, they will say that God exists by necessity and doesn't need a cause. Why is it then that the universe can't exist on its own with no need of a cause?
But people are now so desperate to show that the universe created itself from nothing.
No, there never was nothing. I don't believe that the universe created itself any more than Lennox believes that God created himself.
Which seems to me to be an immediate oxymoron. If I say X created Y, I'm assuming the existence of X to explain the existence of Y. If I say X created X, I'm assuming the existence of X to explain the existence of X, which simply shows that nonsense remains nonsense even if high-powered scientists utter it.
Why does that argument not apply to God? Does Lennox not believe that God's existence explains itself? I don't think he believes that God created himself, but apologists tend to argue that God exists by logical necessity. If Lennox doesn't believe that, then how does he explain God's existence?
It reminds me a little bit of G.K. Chesterton, who said, "It is absurd to complain that it is unthinkable for an unthinkable God to make everything out of nothing, and then to pretend that it is more thinkable that nothing should turn itself into everything."
I don't believe that nothing turned itself into everything. I don't believe that there ever was nothing. There has never been a time when nothing existed. This should be obvious because at every point in time, at least time has existed.
"The heavens declare the glory of God," says the ancient psalm. And we've unraveled a bit of that, seeing the fine-tuning of the fundamental forces of nature.
Why would an all-powerful God need to finely tune the forces of nature? The fine-tuning argument says that if the parameters of the universe were even slightly different, the existence of life would be impossible, therefore they must have been finely tuned in order for life to be possible. However, it could only be true that life could not exist in a universe with different parameters if there is no God. If an all-powerful God exists, then such a God would have the power to put life into a universe with any constants and laws. In fact, if we lived in a universe with parameters that made the natural development of life impossible, that would be far greater evidence that our existence is not a merely natural phenomenon. The fact that life developed in a universe with laws and constants that allow such a thing without miraculous intervention shows that such intervention is not necessary for the development of life.
It's something that's so striking to scientists that it demands explanation.
The explanation that seems most plausible to me is that the parameters of the universe have never been free to vary. The mere fact that we can imagine them being different, and we can imagine what the consequences of different parameters would be, does not mean that they ever actually could have been different.
And it seems to me that Arno Penzias hit it right. He is the Nobel Prize winner who discovered the microwave background on which a lot of the evidence for the Big Bang is based. He said astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan.
A supernatural plan created by an all-powerful God would not need the universe to be finely tuned. If there is a God, and that God finely tuned the universe, he didn't finely tune it for life because he didn't need to finely tune it for life. Sometimes apologists will pivot to claiming that while the universe may not have been finely tuned for life, since the parameters are so specific, it must still have been finely tuned for God's preferences. However, since we can't know what God's preferences were, there's no way to test this assertion.
But I want to come to what I think is one of the fundamental arguments for theism. I take it this house believes in reason. That's why we're all here. And as a scientist, I believe that the universe is rationally intelligible.
I see no reason why science requires anyone to believe that the universe is rationally intelligible. There are many phenomena for which we seem to be able to give some explanation, but doing science in no way requires the assumption that we will ever be able to figure out any phenomenon we scientifically investigate. We may find things that science cannot digest and which human minds can never grasp. Maybe someday we'll reach a limit to what science can reveal. It's still worth doing because we don't seem to have reached that point yet.
That is something that has struck some of the geniuses of science as demanding an explanation. Einstein said the only incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible.
We don't know that the universe per se is comprehensible, though. We certainly don't currently comprehend everything, and there is no guarantee that we will be able to eventually figure out all of the things which we currently do not comprehend. But even if the universe is comprehensible, why does that require a God to exist? If the universe is purely physical, why would it be impossible for physical beings to understand it? And why must we assume that the default state of reality is incomprehensibility, and that the existence of comprehensibility, if it does in fact exist, must be imposed by a conscious mind? That seems like a baseless assumption to me. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.